The height h in feet of the tip of the minute hand of a wall clock as a function of time in minutes can be modeled by the equation given here. Which number from 1 to 12 is the minute hand pointing to at t equals 0? Well, let's say that this is the midline. So we've got a function that is periodic. You know, it's a cosine function. So it's going up and down and up and down. So this question at the heart of it is asking, does it start off at time 0? Is it starting off up at its highest point, which would be 12 o'clock? Is it starting off at its lowest point, which would be 6 o'clock on the clock? Or is it starting off at the midline, which would either be 9 o'clock or 3 o'clock? All right, I'll have to think about it much harder to figure out if it turns out to be on the midline and I have to choose between 9 o'clock and 3 o'clock, I'm going to have to give it more thought. But if it turns out to be at the high point or the low point, then that will be obvious. Okay, so that's the background knowledge. Okay, so to figure that out, we're going to need to know something about the period and the phase shift. So let's start with the period. This right here is the b value of any function. So the b value helps us to find the period because we know that the period is always 2 pi divided by the b value. So in this case, the period is going to be 2 pi divided by pi over 30. Okay, so the period is going to be 2 pi times 30 over pi. All right, so the pi's are going to cancel each other out. So guess what? The period is 60, which is no surprise because we're talking about a clock. And when you're talking about a clock, it repeats every 60 minutes. So of course the period is 60 minutes. Really, that was just common sense. But that is important as you're picturing the graph because in terms of the key values, the highs and lows and where it hits the midpoint, it's all about the period. I might need this space. Let me erase a little of this. Alright, so fine. We know the period is 60. We got it. But I need space because we're going to be shifting things around, so I might need some of this negative stuff. Okay, so the period is 60. So that means if I go all the way over here and call this 60, then right here, this is going to be 30. Okay, and this would be 15. All right, and this would be, that's not 15. This is 15, and this is 45. Okay, those are the key values. Of course, this is 0. Now, if there was no phase shift, okay, if there was no minus 15, then the cosine function normally starts off at its highest point, and then it goes like this. It goes to its lowest point, and then back to the midline, and then it goes to its highest point. All right, however, there's a shift. Okay, this minus 15 is a phase shift. That means it's a shift either to the left or to the right. And it's the opposite of the way that it looks. So this minus 15 actually represents a shift that is to the right by 15 minutes in this case. So I need to take this graph and shift it to the right by 15. Alright, so I'll just do that by using a different color. Okay, so I'll use green. So if I take every key point and I shift it to the right by 15, okay, to the right by 15 minutes. Okay, so the graph now looks like this. Alright, so this tells me that at 15 minutes, that's when the graph will be at its highest point. But of course, this continues forever in both directions. So if I were to continue this graph, okay, it would be like this. And so that means at 0, it's actually starting at the midline. Alright, so now I have to decide if it's if that means that it's 3 o'clock or 9 o'clock. Alright, because I know it starts at the midline, but now I have to choose. So here's how I will choose between these two options. Now, let's say if it starts at 3 o'clock. Okay, since a clock motion moves this way, all right, clockwise, then if it starts at 3 o'clock, it will immediately go down from there. Okay, now if it starts at 9 o'clock, and again it's got to move clockwise, then it's going to start at the midline and immediately begin to go up. So if I look at the graph that I have created, I can see that it starts at the midline, but then it immediately goes up from there. So that would only happen if I started at 9 o'clock. All right, I'm starting at the midline, and then I go up from there. So that tells me that 9 o'clock is the correct answer.